So I'm just going to introduce myself so you all know a little bit more about me and why I do what I do. And then we'll dive into how to handle communication when you're stressed or difficult conversations. I actually am a Code Fellows alum. I went through Code Fellows a little over 5 years ago now. And I work at a company currently called Ethos. So I've been a software engineer since I left Code Fellows, and it's been a really wonderful adventure. Previous to this, I was a psychotherapist, and I did that for about 7 years, and my specialty was complex and severe trauma. And I also taught a lot of communication because you work in a lot of communities and populations that communication is just a struggle and it doesn't always come naturally to us. And so I had the pleasure of teaching a lot of that. And so I've carried that passion over from that industry into this one. And I really enjoy teaching people how to have hard conversations in the context of a work environment, because there's a lot of resources around how to have conversations that are hard, or how to handle conversations and communication when you're stressed in our interpersonal relationships. But sometimes it can be hard to translate that to our work relationships. And so I really enjoy kind of breaking down like what works, what doesn't, and trying to give some really practical skills that you can use to hopefully make your job easier, right? And you can use this with other students. This is a great way to, these will give you skills to, give and receive feedback a bit more effectively. And I'll make time to ask questions, or make room for you to ask questions throughout. So don't worry, we'll still be a bit more interactive. I do want to hear from you all. I think that it helps to be able to answer some specific questions. So that's kind of me and this in a nutshell. So we're going to start off this conversation about things that interfere with effective communication, because I think sometimes it's really useful to break down what's not working before we start to focus on what works. I'm going to start off and I'm going to talk through a few different things that I've seen fairly consistently, and then I'm going to get some feedback from you all if of places that you might have noticed this as well. So one of the biggest things that interferes with effective communication is assumptions. And we kind of throw that around a lot, right? Like you'll say, don't make assumptions. And I think on some level, it's not always fully processed what it means to make an assumption, which seems silly, but it's true. I think when we think of assumptions in relation to communication, it looks like, do I already have an idea of how this conversation is going to go? Right? Have I been playing a tape in my mind about how this is going to go forward, what they're going to say? Like, how many times have you sat down and thought, well, I'm going to say this, and then they're going to say this? And it's natural to do that. There's nothing wrong with our brains wanting to kind of protect ourselves from any possible outcome or be as prepared as possible. But what happens is it eliminates room for there to be a different possibility and a different outcome, especially if we're already stressed about how the conversation might go or how giving or receiving feedback might go. Making an assumption about the trajectory it's going to take can really limit our ability to communicate effectively. So that's one big one. Another is strong feelings, right? I think that we don't really get to acknowledge feelings a lot in workplaces and in educational spaces, but we're human beings and they're very real, right? And so whether those strong feelings are coming from talking to another person and what they said, felt upsetting to us, or having an interaction that felt uncomfortable and that setting us up and feeling really activated, or we're just having a hard day, right? And our feelings are in the forefront of our brains. We can't compartmentalize them in a way that we want. That can make it really hard to have effective conversations because it's a different part of your brain that's in the driver's seat, right? So you're trying to have this calm, cool, collected conversation, but what's happening is your emotions are really taking the steering wheel. And so you might find yourself responding in ways that you don't feel proud of, right? Or saying things in ways that you consistently find that you're not getting what you need or what you want. And so that's a good one to check in with. The other thing that I really like to bring home about ineffective communication is the method of communicating. And I think that that's true now, more than ever in a lot of ways because of the pandemic, right? A lot more of us are relying on text as a form of communication, whether that's messaging through, Slack, whether that's email, or just text messaging in general. And a lot can be lost in translation in writing. And part of that is that by default, we infer tone when we read things, right? So depending on how I'm feeling, again, right, how my day is going, how my mood is, I might receive a message and I can really misread it. I can take hello in a lot of different ways, right? I'm sure you've experienced it. You've had someone say something that without the tone added probably would seem neutral, but for whatever reason, adding that extra bit of tone can completely shift the way that we respond and we react, right? And also understanding that as someone communicating, how am I writing this? Am I writing this in a way that it is clear what I'm trying to convey, that this other person might not, is it possible for this to be interpreted as short or, as though I'm frustrated. So it's good to kind of be aware of the downfalls of always having written communication and how that complicates the way that we try to interact with each other. So another one that's really good to think about as far as setting yourself up for success is checking in with your own personal triggers in your life. And I bring this up a lot in workplace conversations, and there's always kind of a little like, oh, right? Like we don't want to think about our emotional triggers, our life triggers, which is totally fair, but it's also unrealistic because we aren't robots, right? And our life comes with us when we go to work and when we go to school and when we're interacting with people. And so if if I have a hard time with people who are very authoritarian, right? People who say things in a very direct way because of things in my personal life, that's really good information for me. It's really good for me to be aware of how my life, my personal life affects my interactions at work, at school, because it can help you tend to that, right? Like if I spend time tending to how I'm responding to people based on the experiences I've had in my life, it sets me up to be more successful and more present with the people I'm currently interacting with, right? It's hard to have a conversation with one person when like your dad is in the room or, all of the ex-girlfriends you've had a problem with are right there. So we really want to be aware of how that can impact our ability to have what feel like unrelated conversations. Okay. So another one is just checking in with like our general well-being. And I think that this is another part of our external life that comes, or our internal and external life that comes with us into work and into educational spaces. It's legit to have a really bad day, right? Like we've gone through a lot as a culture, as a country, and pandemic life is real. And so acknowledging that, like, okay, am I in a good place to have hard conversations or navigate difficult circumstances if I haven't slept well? Right? Have I been eating? Am I fed? And it, again, sometimes these things seem so simple, but they can make a big difference. I'm definitely someone that has sensitivity around blood sugar. And so there have been plenty of times that something wasn't an issue. The only problem was that I was hungry. That's fixable, right? Like I could eat before having these conversations. And it's an elementary concept in a lot of ways, but it's something that we can neglect, right? We can get busy. Maybe we have stuff going on in our life that makes it hard to sleep. All of those things are so valid, but being aware of that can help us kind of cultivate what we need to be able to communicate better. The other thing that is helpful to think about is with the particular person that you're communicating with, have you had previous difficult interactions with? Right? That can really set us up to kind of play psychic. Remember, I was talking about having assumptions and assuming intentions. If I've had difficult interactions in the past with someone, it's highly likely that I will assume it's going to go that way again. Now, what I used to tell my clients, and I mean it when I say this, is that we really don't know. I know you think you know, but there is always room for it to go differently. And I've seen it happen time and time again. And one thing that happens when we make that assumption and we already brace ourselves for it to go badly, and this is different than being aware of certain situations, and we'll talk about that. But if I'm already bracing myself for this to go badly, I'm I'm going to be projecting an energy that's not going to be effective in this conversation. Human beings are sensitive to energy, right? I don't know if you've ever been in a room and someone walked in and they were having a really hard day and you picked up on it right away, right? And you ask them, you're like, how are you doing? They're like, I'm fine. You're like, oh, all right. Like, great. This is going to go great. But if we're that person, right? If we come in and we're already like, oh, this guy is just going to be such a jerk when I have this conversation, we're going to convey that to some extent. And can we hold awareness that being presumptuous about how it's going to go could actually impact it? And I'm not saying like, this isn't about manifesting it. This isn't, we have lots of different beliefs around this. This is just purely, how do I show up in the room, or how do I show up in this space if I've already decided this is not going to go well? And I really try to be aware of that in my own life, because I want to make room for it to go well. I want to make space for difficult conversations and stressful interactions to possibly go better, especially with people that I've had a hard time with in the past. So those are some of the big things that I like to bring up around this. And I think the other piece is just this myth that effective communication comes naturally, right? There are a lot of factors that come into our own communication style, from our family to our friends to our whole social network growing up, our own personal experiences. What I think is effective communication for me might not be for you, right? So it's really okay if communication feels hard, and I want to hold space for that, and I want to validate that, because I think when we learn about communication, it feels very like, well, it's just talking to people. Like, I should just know how to do this. But we don't, especially when it gets harder, right? Especially when emotions are involved, especially when there are deadlines and there are stressors around the communication. So if you've come to this and in your life you've really struggled with communication, it is okay. If it has not been taught to you directly, you're doing fine. Like, the fact that you're here, the fact that you're interested in learning about it is awesome. And it's something that we have to figure out. I wasn't always an effective communicator. I used to always tell people when I did these workshops, I had a really hard time talking to people just about kind of everything. Honestly, I spent a long time where I was very withdrawn. It was easy to, take things personally or feel defensive. And so I had to do a lot of work to talk to people the way I do today. So this didn't come prepackaged, right? So that's my ineffective spiel. So what I'd love to do is just take a minute, because I know that was a lot, but I hope that some of that resonated and some of that made sense. Are there any other things that you've noticed, and you're welcome to drop it in the chat or in Q&A, probably chat is effective, that have interfered with communication for you? Or are there things that you have questions about around what can interfere with communication? And I'll just wait a little bit and see if y'all come up with anything, and it's okay if you don't. Body language. Yeah. So Rachel mentioned body language. That's a really big one, right? Is being aware of how we're showing up physically. One of the things that I like to tell people about is that I have my eyebrow raises a lot, and I didn't realize how it does it when I'm curious or interested. And I had someone finally tell me, like, I think you're mad at me every time you do it. And I was like, that's really good information, right? So yes, I see facial expressions, same thing, right? Like, can we take a breath? Can we do things that allow us to show up in a little bit more of a relaxed state? That goes back to how we build tension unintentionally, right? Another good one we have. So sometimes we confuse not getting what we want with not being heard. Yeah, that's a really great point. It's very easy to feel disappointed, right? And feel invalidated. And I think that that can be a big piece of work for some of us, right? Especially if that's something we've experienced a lot in our life. So that's a really beautiful thing to be aware of. Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to read through a few more of these. So being overly tired. Yeah, being overly tired is real, especially with everything that's been going on. It is so fair to check in with yourself and be like, wow, I am too tired to have this conversation today, and try to navigate setting that boundary and asking for your needs to be met effectively around that, right? Okay, and we also have um, in written communication, I try to communicate tone through emojis. Beautiful, right? That's one of the great things about emojis that have done for us, is that it gives us an opportunity to say, I'm actually happy, right? Or like, this is fine. So I really love how we can get creative in written communication, right? And we're seeing that now with I feel like every year a new exclamation point gets added, right? To convey excitement. Wonderful. And then Ty, I now ask friends before I go off on a rant or a tirade about something, if they have the emotional space for it. I also let them know that they can feel free to say no, as there are other people I can ask as well. I also establish that I'm looking for advice, looking to just be heard, or looking to help validate me or understand if I'm being a jerk. Beautiful, right? That is such a wonderful thing to do. I think making an assumption that another person is in a good place to hear what we have to say can be ineffective, right? Because they might be having a hard time and not have the room to answer what we need, and or to show up in the way that we need. And it's completely fair to ask that. And I love this idea of being clear on what we need from the conversation, right? I am a big believer in taking the guesswork out of it for the other person as much as I can, because it's not an act of caretaking, it's an act of, I want this to go well, right? If I'm asking for something, if I'm confronting you, if I'm, calling something out, I want to give you as much information as possible for us both to be successful. So I love that. Okay, I have another that confirms, yes, the facial expression. You've been told the same thing when you're really focused. That's really common, right? Like our focused state of being, it can look very, very serious. Christopher says, if we make a concerted effort for our team to get to know each other better, we all have a greater awareness, intuition around another's nonverbal, verbal indicators and our feelings or our needs. Yes, networking, doing things where you get to talk to each other outside of stressful situations, making space to talk really directly about what you need. All of that is so beautiful. Anthony mentions that they have a naturally furrowed brow, even when they're in a great mood. Sometimes this can be taken the wrong way. It's amazing how much eyebrows convey emotion, right? And how much that can affect communication. I used to give people an exercise of like trying to say things that upset them with a relaxed face. And it's a weird exercise. It's not that you have to do that in your real life, but it gives you a good amount of physical information of what's happening in your face as it tenses, so you can be aware of it when you're interacting. Um, yes, communication is a very difficult skill to learn. 100%. I'm so glad you're here. It was difficult for me too. Yes, great points. And Dean says, trying to communicate with someone that is far above your pay grade, your boss's boss's boss, puts an added level of stress. 100%. Power dynamics in a communication relationship can be very stressful, right? Sexism, racism, we see all of that deeply impact communication and levels of safety and levels of efficacy. And so being able to acknowledge that, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with the head of the company. What do I need to do to take care of myself in order to have this conversation can be really helpful. And just sometimes validating the fact that it's okay to find that stressful, right? It's not always going to be a comfortable conversation. So I love that you're calling that out. We also have Roger, who says, when you know you're not heading into an interaction with a good state of mind, what are some of the things that you do to put yourself in a better spot? Fabulous. That's going to be in my next section here, so I will answer that shortly. Non-emoji folks always sound mad, indifferent, annoyed to emoji folks. Yes, and generational communication differences are important, right? It can be really good to understand that someone who is maybe 10, 20 years my senior doesn't feel comfortable with emojis, or that wears them out, right? And then vice versa, that them not using the standard amount of exclamation points or emojis might be difficult for me to receive. And so how can I just have awareness of that as I'm receiving communication from them, as I'm sending communication from them. Can I adapt what I'm doing a little bit to make it comfortable for both of us? And you'll hear me talk about that a lot, this adaptability around our own communication. And I had someone say this to me, and I think it's important to say this before we talk about how to, what really works here too, is that someone was really frustrated at the idea of updating their communication style to connect with someone who I worked with. We worked with someone that was a bit narcissistic and very sensitive, right? And I'm not saying that as like a criticism, as legitimate experience that this person had. And they said to me, well, I don't want to feel like I'm accommodating him, right? Or like that I'm bending my way to do this. And in my mind, it's like we change the way we talk to people constantly based on our relationships, right? I don't talk to my partner the same way I talk to the waiter. That would be really weird and probably very uncomfortable for everyone involved. I don't talk to my parents the way I talk to a friend, right? And so for me, I look at communication and being an adaptable communicator as one of my best skills and assets possible, because it allows me to get closer to what I need and what I want in my workplace and in my life. And so if it means that I have to be a little bit more aware of what I'm saying around someone, or adjust the tone, or maybe use less or more emojis, right? Or be aware of how sarcasm might infect them, then I'm doing myself a favor, right? It's not about doing something just for the other person or babying them or kind of whatever, however we view changing communication. It's really about just being effective. So I love y'all's responses. And we have, who here has ever put sarcasm after a text or an online post? Yeah. And sometimes that can be really helpful, right? To be able to call out directly what we're saying, because it's hard to read it and we don't want to offend someone. And maybe we just are naturally a little bit more sarcastic. Beautiful. Okay. Love these. So now we're going to start talking about things that I love to do and kind of, little skills that I find have been really helpful and make a big impact. And I'm going to answer the 2 questions that I see here from Roger and Kyle. So I haven't forgotten about you all. Okay. So what helps when we're about to have a difficult conversation or we're stressed out? Pausing. Oh my gosh, can taking a pause be one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and another person? And a pause doesn't have to be a long time, right? Certain situations are going to require us to respond quickly. Others, we might have time and we might have the luxury of time. But for me, it's really important to take a few breaths before I take my next step, because I want to make sure that I'm not in the part of my brain that is reactive, right? As much as possible. Not that a few breaths will always do that, but sometimes that's just enough for me to go, okay, I don't need to just say the first thing that comes to my mind, right? So pausing is a beautiful thing to try. It is okay, 100% okay, to prepare for a conversation, especially a hard conversation. So that might look like, right, we heard this before in the chat, that might look like talking to trusted friends, right? And pick your friends wisely, right? Like, we all have some fiery friends that might give us some ineffective advice, and we need them for different moments. But really seeking suggestions and seeking an opportunity to process what's been said to us or what we need to say is completely fair. Asking yourself, do I have time do I have to respond right now? Is this an emergency? So because of our text-based and instant messaging and, all of these DMs, everything happening all the time, it is very easy to feel like everything is an emergency and has to be responded to right away. So one thing that can be so helpful is really truly pausing and saying that to yourself. Do I have to respond right away? Maybe you do, right? It's real. Sometimes maybe you do. And the best thing you can do is like take a sip of water, take a few deep breaths, write out what you need to say. Sometimes the best thing is to be able to say, whoa, I really need to, I need to come back to this. And some of the great ways to say that, like to acknowledge that to another person, to say like, hey, I really want to give you a meaningful response here, but I need to take some time to gather my thoughts. Can we reconvene in an hour, right? If you I want to hear what you have to say. I want to figure out a better way for me to say what I'm thinking. Let's reconvene, right? That's completely fair. And most people will be open to it because, again, they want to get what they want too, right? And so being able to say like, hey, me being able to pause and take time before I respond to you will help you be successful with me is kind of beautiful, right? That's a really nice gift to give to another person. Am I in a good place to respond? This comes in with some of the questions that we have here from Roger and Kyle, right? Fear can tend to keep us from interacting with others, especially in professional settings, feeling like you don't want to, am I going to look stupid, or negative? And so, withdrawing, like checking in with all of that. Am I having fear right now? Am I feeling afraid of talking to this person? Am I feeling angry? For me, early on in communication, like undoing and rebuilding in my own life, I really had to pay attention to physical cues because I wasn't super in touch with my feelings. And so if I was having a conversation with someone and I got really hot and my heart started racing, it was probably not a good time to respond, right? And so that I started listening for those moments in my body, and I was like, okay, wow, like I'm a little shaky, right? Maybe I'm feeling afraid right now. Maybe I'm already judging myself, and I need to like just take 5 minutes, take some deep breaths, and just reground before I go into this. So those are really great things to check in with. And then part of that comes, do I need to tend to the feelings that I'm having? It's completely valid to have big feelings in relationship to work communication, right? Like we spend so much time at work, we spend so much time at school. It is completely valid to have big feelings in response to the interactions that we have. What we do about it is what matters, right? So being able to acknowledge that A, it's okay that you're having feelings about something that you're interacting about, and B, is there something like, do you need to smell some essential oils? Do you need to take like a short walk before you have this conversation? Do you need to play a game that you love? Do you need to, pause and like eat something and see if the emotions are coming from like more of a primal place, right? So we're going to get better outcomes if we can take care of ourselves and take care of our feelings and not feel stupid for having feelings about interacting with people in hard situations. I find that makes it 10 times worse, right? It's like if you have an interaction coming up and you're judging yourself, that's going to be harder. I already talked about asking for time to respond. That's fabulous. And assessing method, right? It is 100% okay to say, I'd rather hop on a call, right? Sometimes we get to a place in our communications, especially in Slack, and when you're, having discussions on PR, on pull requests, or you're having like these, piecemeal conversations all over the place. Sometimes the most effective thing is to pull text out of it and just say, hey, like let's hop on a call and talk this out, right? So understand that like you have a lot of freedom in these situations to try to have the best outcome possible and see what happens, right? Like if the other person isn't open to that, that's going to be another issue, but you can at least step back and go, okay, cool, I really tried here. Check the tape that you're playing. Am I assuming that this will go badly? Can I hold space for what if it's different? That's a question I'll ask myself, right? A lot of times when we've had stressful interactions, it's really easy to be like, oh my God, this is going to suck. I hate my life. So what would it look like if instead I held space, even if it was just for like a minute, to say, what if it's different? What if this interaction I'm about to have is different? And see what happens, right? Sometimes just the act of that can really alter the experience that you have with that person. The next thing that I like to suggest is asking yourself, what are the facts? A lot of times we get very inundated with our own thoughts and our opinions and our feelings, and we lose sight of the facts of what was said, right? Maybe someone made a comment on your pull request and the way they said it felt a bit judgmental, and you're feeling like stupid and a bad coder and a failure, et cetera, right? The tape is going down the line. So what would it look like to pause and say, okay, this person wants me to change this on my pull request. That's the fact, right? Maybe they said it in a way that was ineffective. That's a fact too, right? They stated this in a way that was difficult for me to hear. Can I practice avoiding judgmental language? This is bad, you're wrong, right? Like one thing that I really like to teach people is how to separate saying that something is not done well or ineffective, and separating that from the person, right? It's a lot different if I say to you on a pull request, like you're wrong, versus what you did in the code here was ineffective. I would suggest trying this. That's completely different. Same result though, right? Except actually pretty better result, because most likely that person is then going to be able to change what they're experiencing and produce better code. Because if I just say you're wrong, that doesn't give someone a lot of room to, where do you go from there, right? Um, and it makes it harder for me because then I'm not getting what I want, and then I'm also frustrated. And same with giving feedback back, right? If someone says something like that, it's okay to say, hey, that was ineffective the way that you shared that with me. I would prefer if you said it like this, right? It's okay to teach people how to talk to us. One thing that I teach in every communication workshop that can feel a little silly, but is has saved people a lot of arguments, is the gift of using and over but. So this doesn't mean that you can never use the word but. That would be completely unrealistic. But I want to think like for a good example is like if I came up to you and I said, wow, you look really good, but that completely changes the conversation instantly, right? Or like you did really good on that project, but what would it look like to just change that 3-letter word, right? And say, you did really good on that project. And I think that I'd love to see you do some more research over here versus, but you didn't do enough research over here. So sometimes it's a gift we can give to people to just say, let me not invalidate what you did do and just hold space for what you accomplished. And also like add this piece that could have been done better or done differently. Um, One of the things that I think is also really helpful along those lines in giving a gift to a person when you're communicating is stating your intentions. So it is totally fair to come into a conversation and say, hey, I really want us to both be heard and to come up with a solution. Are you open to that? Because it takes the guesswork out of it for the other person, right? Being able to understand that you're both on the same page about what you want to get from this conversation is beautiful. They're not sitting there feeling like, what's going to happen? So you're already kind of putting water on a fire by just being really clear, right? Being clear and kind. It's okay to ask clarifying questions. I had a coworker of mine the other day make an announcement in one of our group meetings, and he was like, everyone needs to just do better about this and da 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 da. And I reached out to him later and I was like, hey, I totally I respect that was something that you needed to call out. Is there something that I could be doing differently specifically? And it was really helpful. It was really helpful because then he was able to identify that this was an issue for everyone. I had a moment of is he calling me out? Like what's happening? So clarifying questions are a gift. And that it's okay to step away if the conversation gets difficult again, right? There's nothing wrong with taking a break. And the last thing that I want to leave you with before I make some room to answer some more questions is it's okay to teach people how to talk to you. And it's okay for you to take time to understand how you like to be spoken to. And I don't mean this as something that not everyone's going to be able to adhere to this. Not everyone's going to be able to do it the way that you want all the time. But it is completely fair to teach people around you and say, hey, if you want to give me feedback about something, I respond really well when it's said like this, right? Who loses in that situation? Like the other person might have to adjust a little bit, but that's kind of great, right? Like I had clients that I could talk to in a really I had to be really gentle with. I have friends like that there needs to be a bit more gentleness and kindness in what I say. And then I have friends that I can be like, yo, what are you doing? I don't agree with that. And they're like, ha ha ha. And we move on, right? So being understanding and being aware that we're going to be more successful, not only if we're open to talking differently to people around us as they teach us to, but being on the end of teaching other people and saying, look, I had a mentor that loved to just say, I hate this. And I used to just ask him all the time. I would say, look, I don't know where to go with that. I want to give you what you want, but when you say I hate this, it doesn't give me an opportunity to grow. And he adapted his communication and the relationship was great. So I really want to encourage you all to have a little bit more flexibility and room to adjust the way that you communicate. So I'm going to read some of these and respond, and I'm going to keep room for more questions as we kind of wrap up here, because I'd love to hear if there are more. So I read one earlier. So I have a personal rule, and a rule I have also tried to teach my kids: never ever speak when you're angry. Walk away if you have to and ask to continue the conversation at a later time. If you cannot walk away, then pause and think about the best thing to say before anything you can't ever take back. Absolutely. Communication when we're angry can cause irreparable damage at times in relationships. And so again, right, we might not always be aware that we're angry in a conversation. And so starting to understand your own personal cues around anger is so helpful. And recognizing what are quick fixes for me, right? Maybe for me, it's taking a few deep breaths. Maybe it is essential oils. Maybe it is saying, I just need to take a sip of water, right? One cool thing, this is a very weird kind of body hack, if you will. Taking a sip of water or eating something, if you're someone that has had trauma, if you're someone that tends to get in a really stressful kind of more primal place when you're stressed out, drinking something like water, tea, whatever, and eating something can actually help settle your nervous system because it signals that you're safe and you're not trying to actively survive. So that can be like if you're in a situation where you can't step away, try taking a few sips of water and breathing. That is a great thing. I see also, I generally like to call for things because it's faster to get the point. I will remember these things for folks who like to text. Yes, hopping on a call is a beautiful thing to do. Another thing I see here is I'm guilty of being used to talk to people in a very direct tone from the military, even when I'm not trying to be blunt or aggressive. Absolutely, right? Again, that's all of our life experiences completely define how we interact with people around us. And so having that awareness and going, okay, all right, maybe these people aren't going to be able to hear what I'm saying as much because they don't have a military background, right? Can I adapt the way that I communicate with them so that we both get what we want better, right? Or can I have understanding and compassion that this might be harder, right? And again, this isn't about it's interesting that this can be viewed as like caretaking and things like that, or like, well, I don't want to have to, change the way that I talk for them to just deal with it. But I don't know about you. Like I want ease of communication in my life and in my workplace and in my educational spaces. And so if me just being a little kinder here and there, or being able to add a little padding if needed, right, instead of just being so direct, it gets me further along, I would love to do that, right? And I love that you're aware of that. Being aware of our communication styles is a huge gift because it means we can better identify places that we want to work on. I see also someone pointed out to me one time that but is a trigger word. I try to be more careful about that. Yeah, but a lot of it's funny that like a 3-letter word can cause so much damage, right? What a powerful little word. It's often used to invalidate people. And I think that that's something really important to think about when we're communicating with people is, do I have space and room to validate this person's experience? And am I using language that conveys that? And validating someone's experience is not the same of saying you're right. It's saying you have a right to your experience, right? And am I going to get better results in a difficult conversation if I acknowledge where you're coming from? I might not agree with you, but I can say, oh, that's a really valid point, or I appreciate what you said, or I can see the value in what you said, and right, on and on and on. Beautiful. Okay, so I have another question here. It says, so I have a tendency to start talking and I hope I find the words as I go. This stems from nervousness and social interaction, probably. So sometimes I say things I don't understand the implications of. Any advice on how I can better improve in actively paying attention to your words? Yes. One thing that I used to teach people is being able to take a breath and repeat what the person said to you before you respond. Like repeat it in your head. Sometimes you can reflect it back to them, right? Like I could say, I hear you saying that you want me, to, well, let's talk like maybe code layout, right? Like I hear you wanting me to put these on different lines after this certain amount of code is written on this particular line. And yeah, I'm really willing to do that, right? So there's nothing wrong with integrating what they're saying into what you're saying, if that helps. Taking more deep breaths, like maybe setting a rule for yourself, a light rule of like, can I take 3 deep breaths before I respond, right? And what would that look like? Because that's a reasonable amount to just say, or being able to say, hey, I want to that's interesting. Let me think about that. I do that a lot in interviews, right? If I'm not sure what I want to say and I don't want to just stumble and I get nervous, I'll just say, wow, okay, yeah, that's a good question. I'd like to just take a moment to think about it, and then I genuinely do. That was a great question. And then I hear too, I feel that I grew up, okay, Anthony, I feel that I grew up surrounded by those in the military, so I'm used to being direct and talked to in that way. I'm not used to handling other ways of communication. And that's totally fair, right? We have gendered communication, we have cultural communication, we have communication that comes from all of these different places. And so really, like, are there places in your life where you can allow room for yourself to be a little bit more open to changing the way that you communicate? If so, you're already off to a great start. That's it, right? The fact that you're here, the fact that you're interested in adapting the way that you communicate is already a huge part of the hurdle around improving our communication. And so being able to acknowledge that, like, wow, the way that I communicate to some people might not work for others. What do I want to do about that? Is going to set you up for success in whatever interaction that you have. So I think it's really beautiful that you all already have kind of an awareness of interactions and communication styles that haven't worked all the time with everyone. And sometimes they're great. Sometimes you need to be able to just be direct and deal with it and move forward. Direct communication is a beautiful thing as well. It's just acknowledging, am I using the best skills possible with the person that I'm interacting with right now? And that's going to change, right? That is a changing landscape. So I know that that was a lot of information. I hope that there are pieces of that that you can pull out. I always tell people I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up at Eve Dennison with Ethos, and like, absolutely feel free to ask me questions. Sometimes I'm a little slow to respond, but which is my own communication pitfall, is I have too many messaging apps and things these days. So I try to do the best that I can, but I'm completely open to conversations, questions, follow-up questions. If there's like a specific thing that you're sitting going, wow, I have issues with this all the time, I'm wondering some things I can do, completely feel free to reach out to me. Communication is hard. And it was said by someone else in the chat too, right? Like, we have survived a lot as a community, as people in the past few years. And that's not even counting all of the other stuff in our personal lives. So be gentle with yourselves. Be gentle with yourselves. Going to work, being in school, doing all of these things while all this other stuff is going on is heavy, and it can be really hard. And then trying to be kind and be considerate and communicate effectively on top of it can be really hard. So if you've gotten this far and you're doing all of this work, I am proud of you, even though I don't know you. And I hope that this stuff can really be helpful to you moving forward. So I'll leave the last few minutes for if there's any remaining little questions. And then I see Ty wrote, we have all learned communication from decades of traumatized people, and it passes down from one generation to the next. 100%. Being aware of how generational trauma has impacted our ability to communicate in the present is so important. Examining our own family systems, right? All of that stuff makes us a better communicator in the workplace and at school. And we can't separate those out. Right? We live a lot of our lives as though these are completely separate, and they're just not. We're not robots, even if we feel a bit robotic sometimes. This stuff is inevitably going to infect the way that we interact in our day-to-day life. So yeah, very true. Very, very true. Yeah, let's see. Looks like how I'll answer this one too. How would you approach communicating with someone who is not comfortable or open to communication? I am a big fan of asking directly and saying, what can I do to make this more comfortable for you? 100%. 100%. There is nothing wrong with saying, look, I really want to come to a solution with you. Is there anything that I'm doing that I could do differently to make this more comfortable for you? Or is there anything that you need from me that I'm not giving to you? And obviously do things within reason. If they have a really unreasonable request, that's a different issue, but it's 100% okay to ask somebody how you can help them be more comfortable. Yeah. Oh, you're so welcome, John. He said so many good tips. And JJ says, we always hear that we should always take the high road. Is that approach always advisable, or at some point it becomes detrimental? Not everyone is logical or reasonable. Yeah, I'll leave you with this. At the end of the day, we're human, right? Like, you're a human being. Even me, right? I have all of this training. I got decades of education around communication. I've taught it. I am not exempt from saying some ineffective things, but I think a lot of it is we just try the best we can where we can, right? And understanding that, like, some people are just not going to be able to communicate well, and that's not on us. That's not our side of the street, right? Can I walk away and feel proud that I did the best I could? And can I be kind and gentle with myself when I struggle with communication? Yes, because if I judge myself, I'm going to struggle harder, right? And so I think, yeah, sometimes your unusual circumstances call for unusual solutions, and that's okay. Welcome to being human. We just do the best we can, and sometimes that looks really different than others. Oh, okay. Well, it looks like we're at 1 o'clock. I'd love to read Ty's last thing. I hear you may not be able to change how someone speaks to you, but you can change how you receive. that, and you can ask to be communicated with differently. 100%. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was so great to get to talk to you all today. I really hope that this was valuable. As I said, please don't feel like, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have follow-up questions or if you want some resources. And I'm excited that we got to go through this. Yeah, now I'm stumbling on my words. We did great. Yeah.
So much for your time, Eve. For everyone in the audience, I hope you, sorry, I've got dogs playing at my feet. Apologize for the background noise. But I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Hopefully you guys took a lot from this going into project weeks, going into your new careers for that matter. It's all really, really good info. Maybe even next time we should talk about how to take in that feedback and how to process it.
Yes, let's do that. Love that. Love
Love to
that.
have you back sometime, Eve. Everyone have a great weekend.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.